My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Today is the feast day of Saint Lucy, martyr. She was executed in Syracuse in Sicily in the year 304 during the very last great Roman persecution, that of the terrible Emperor Diocletian. There are different accounts of her martyrdom, but they all agree in telling us that she was a young woman, barely a teenager, when she rejected the unwanted advances of a certain Roman who took it very badly and sought to get revenge on her. And so what he did was to denounce her to the authorities on account of her being a Christian. And as a result, she joined the great multitude of Christians of that time who ended up dying for their faith. Now, what's particularly noticeable about Saint Lucy is that everything about her is about light. Her very name comes from the Latin for light, lux lucis. Her martyrdom has a connection with light as well, because some of the versions of the story of her martyrdom relate to that her eyes were removed by her persecutor, and as a result she is a patron saint of the blind and of people who suffer from bad eyesight. Another version is a bit strange, perhaps it's apocryphal, that her persistent suitor admired her eyes greatly, and to discourage her she plucked out her own eyes, which is maybe a bit radical, but it's anyway one of the stories that's told. Another thing that brings up this theme of light in connection with St. Lucy is her feast day, today, 13th of December. Because in the past, this day, the 13th of December, was in fact the winter solstice. In other words, the shortest day of the year, when there's the least sunlight and the greatest darkness. And then from tomorrow onwards, the days were getting longer and longer and longer. And now it's, of course, moved, well, everything's moved, it's a long story, but it's moved to the 21st of December. And in the very northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere, that means a lot, because the further north you go, of course, the days get shorter and shorter and shorter till they're almost nothing, and also to the very south. And so her day, being on the 13th of December, it was no accident, in fact. She is, in a certain sense, the beginning of light in the darkness. The darkness is kind of conquered on the solstice, and the light makes a comeback. So her feast day was very popular, and still is actually very popular in the Scandinavian countries, where the winters are very long. And in Scandinavia, still to this very day, young girls on her feast day wear crowns or wreaths of candles on their head, lit candles, by the way. What's more important about her than the symbolism is she herself was a real light. And the light that she carried was the light of Christ himself in her heart. The darkness was the darkness of the pagan Roman Empire into which she was born. And that was an empire which had many great things, but it was also dominated sometimes by terrible cruelty, especially towards those who had low or even no position in society. Slaves, prisoners, think of the gladiators, the sick, infants, and also women. And that's one of the reasons why her aggressor felt that he could so easily have his way with her. And that's why he sought such cruel revenge when she courageously, even though she was such a young girl, she courageously rebuffed him. So unsurprisingly, this image of light is the principal image in the Gospel for today's feast. And it begins by Jesus telling this parable to his disciples. The kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were sensible. The foolish ones did take their lamps, but they brought no oil, whereas the sensible ones took flasks of oil as well as their lamps. So, Jesus, what are these lamps? And what is this oil that you are talking about in today's gospel? I think we can safely say that Jesus would say to you and to me, you, as a Christian, you are the lamp. You have been changed into a lamp by your baptism. And your task, like the task of all lamps and lights, is to turn darkness into light. Even we could say, drowning darkness in an abundance of light. The darkness, for example, of Roman cruelty, in the abundance of the light of the example of the chastity and gentleness of St. Lucy. But of course, a lamp is no good without its fuel. Most lamps now, of course, have batteries, or they're connected to the mains, and electricity powers the lamp. And the stronger the current, or the stronger the battery, the brighter the light. The lamp that Jesus is talking about in this gospel parable, of course, burns oil to produce that light. But it amounts to the same thing. But what is that oil? The oil of the love of Christ that is poured into us. It is poured into us through the sacraments, and especially the Eucharist, and through prayer. And it's that oil that produces the flame in us. It makes the Christian radiant. And so we look at the foolish bridesmaids. They had lamps, they were Christians, but they had no oil, no love of God in them, and no love of others. They didn't provide the kind of witness that St. Lucy does. The darkness is still as dark as ever when they are around. They are present perhaps in a home or in a school or in an office, but their presence makes no difference. They are a dark lamp. I remember I used to live with a fellow who was always cheerful, always smiling, always laughing, a very good Catholic, living his life in harmony with his faith. And once I had an opportunity to speak with his mother when he wasn't there, and she said about him, she said, we call him John, when John walks into the room, it is as if someone just switched on the light. Wouldn't it be wonderful if people could say the same about you and about me? And let's hope, of course, that they never say the opposite, that when you or I come into the room, that it is as if someone just switched off the light. Jesus, you yourself said about Christians, about me, about you, that you are the light of the world. You are to be that shining light in the darkness. Well, let's finish up with a little prayer to St. Lucy in honor of her feast day. St. Lucy, your name means light. You lived your faith knowing the importance of sharing the light of Christ with others, even when it meant persecution and hardship. Please help us to be a light in darkness, to know that we are called to carry the light of Christ to a world in need, to our families, our places of work and ministry, and our church. Help us to see the many opportunities given us each day to be a light in darkness. Amen. Let's turn also to that other great light, especially one of the great lights of Advent, which is Our Lady, asking her to guide us, the morning star, to guide us towards the birth of her Son in Bethlehem at Christmas. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.